I'm gonna start by saying thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all your work. I know at least a couple of mothers who will thank you with their lives and their children's lives because your work just changes perspectives. It changes relationships, which they last for a lifetime. So your work is not just a book or a word, is a relationship and a love that is years and tens of years. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm honored to talk to you.
Amazing.
We're gonna kick it off. In today's digital age, there are two main signs: screen time and no screen time. There are people, parents who say my kid gets 0 or my kid is just free to do everything. Is all screen time considered equal? And is it a pressure for us? Should it be a pressure for us to control the screen time or not to control the screen time? What is for us to keep in mind when we are talking about screen times in kids?
I don't think all screen time is created equal. There's very good data to show that there are certain kinds of screen time that suck you in and it's very sticky. So once you're in, you don't want to leave.
Yeah.
Gaming and social media would be the top two in terms of that stickiness, that once kids are in that, it's hard. Once adults are in that, it's hard for us to exit out of that. So I don't think it's all created equal. I also think if you think of something like having a family movie night, it's on a screen and it involves connection and shared joy and shared curiosity and shared interests. And so there are parts of that that can actually be really beautiful to have together as far as the relationship component goes. I do think that because we live in a time where screens are very available and they're all around us, that it is upon us to start as we wish to go. And so to make certain that we are setting our children up for success from the get-go, that we are teaching them habits around being digital consumers, that they enter into that world responsibly, both for themselves in terms of how they will consume it, but also for others in terms of how they will participate in it. That perhaps becomes a little more relevant as our children get a bit older, and for us to lay the foundation around that. I know that I'm from Canada, so the Canadian Pediatric Society really does recommend 0 screen time for kids under the age of 2. Right. And then from 3 to 5, it's about an hour, from 5 to 12, maybe a couple of hours. And from there forward, your children are going to have, much more independence and much more freedom. And so you'll want those good habits to be in place by that point in time.
Yeah, I found that my good habits with technology just seem to spread around. So I'm working hard on myself, not only for myself, but also trying to work for my kid because, I find that children will copy us more than they will listen to us. Yes. So it's irrelevant if I tell her no screen time while I'm just watching something or doing something. And I've tried to explain my oldest one, I work, right? Also on the phone, so that's, to her, it also comes as screen time. But I'm battling that right now and trying to set up our family habits. And I have to be honest, my second has a little bit of a different, setup because my oldest, as you said, had no screen times till around the age of 2. But now that she gets, and he's just speaking, it's really hard. So I find that really hard to juggle in today's world. It's a tricky subject.
It really is. And I actually think parents are experiencing a lot of shame around that. I have a colleague in Australia whose area is looking at technology and child development. And she has some really interesting statistics on if you question parents about their children's exposure to screens, everybody is underreporting because they feel bad. Yes, that they've allowed for that to happen, or maybe in some cases needed for that to happen because they need something to entertain the children while they get other things done. And so there's this whole sort of culture around it that really requires some dismantling and thinking through.
Not to be taboo anymore.
Yes.
As children grow, we all have the information about emotional regulation, when they're 2 or 3 years old and how we help them. But as children grow, what is our role and how does our role transform in emotional regulation? Like, how do we emotionally support an adolescent or a young adult? How are we meant to be there for them in terms of emotional side?
It's interesting. I think about this as going from what I would characterize as an A-frame relationship to an H-frame relationship. So if you think about A-frame, or I often will use, this hand is sort of like our backbone, and our children are meant to lean on us. And that's where they find rest. That's where they find safety. That's where they find co-regulation. All of those wonderful things that we want for them to experience. And as they grow, they begin to move towards standing on their own. But there will always be this connection of relationship, like that bar that connects the two sides of the H. And by the time they reach adulthood, what we want is for them to be standing like this, but tethered back in an emotional kind of way to the connection. So when my boys, who are now 17 and 20 years of age, when they were little, there was a lot of, closeness and physical contact and all of the senses involved in terms of how that co-regulatory dance was playing out. And because they have that kind of foundation, now that they're, 17 and 20, enormous, hairy young men, the emotional regulation, because there's life, there's bumps in the road and difficult things and challenges that need to be navigated. It's that thread of the relationship that holds them steady and holds them certain and holds them secure. And they know they can come back. They even, in their mind, when they think about the relationship, when they know that that's in the background for them, that in and of itself becomes a stabilizing factor.
Speaking of co-regulation, sleep is a tricky subject here in Romania. It's becoming a bigger and bigger, subject. And I'm referring specifically to sleep training. So we've got information from the 60s, 70s, 80s, saying that, first of all, we need to teach our children how to sleep, although sleep is a biological function, So we've got people pushing, cry it out, fervor, just misattuning to your kids, just, picking up, putting down like a robot kind of a technique, or just completely misattuning it. How does that feel to you? And how does, in your experience, your knowledge, your research, how does that sit with attachment and with co-regulation, with emotions, with lifelong relationship?
I'll tell you an interesting story by way of answering the question. So I became pregnant with my first son when I was a doctoral student. And it just so happened that I was working as a research assistant in the School of Nursing. Though I was a psychology student, I was placed in the School of Nursing. And my office was in this pod of offices where one of the nation's leading infant sleep experts was working. And she would come into my office and she would wag her finger at me and she would say all the time that I was pregnant, you better have that baby in his own room, you better not, da-da-da-da-da, all of the things. And then my child was born and I became very alive with my maternal instinct and remember all of the voices around me saying, he needs to learn. You need to leave him to figure it out. And feeling like somebody was ripping my heart out of my body with the idea that I couldn't respond to him. That didn't last very long. Because it was an incredibly unnatural and distressing experience to leave a little baby to cry. Later on, I had become involved in a case where a child was removed from the care of one parent, placed in the care of the other parent due to some traumatic kinds of experiences. And my job as a psychologist was to go and observe a visit between this 2-year-old little baby and his one parent. And what happened is he cried and cried and cried for about 5 minutes, and then he fell asleep. But he wasn't sleeping.
Oh my goodness.
He had actually passed out. So the distress of not being co-regulated in that extreme kind of situation resulted in him falling asleep. And that's actually what happens when we leave children to cry it out, that the stress response causes them to sleep. And then we're like, yes, we did it.
Good job, Mom.
We're such great parents. We've taught this child how to sleep. But in fact, what the child has learned is that their needs aren't tended to in certain situations. And that may happen for some children, and then there will be other kinds of experiences that kind of soften the effect of that. For other children, the consequences of that are really egregious and highly problematic. So the research around all of that now, and a lot of social policy, I know in Canada, parts of Australia, parts of the US, there's social policy now or messaging that goes out that's very contrary to what, at least what my parents were taught. And even when my children 20 years ago were arriving into the world, the message now is quite different. That babies are meant to be in room with you for at least the first 6 months. That those cries in those first 6 months are to be tended to as though they're emergencies. And that children don't need to learn how to sleep. What children need to experience is that when they put a bid for connection out, which is a cry, those kinds of behaviors, that the grown-ups come. And every time they put a bid out, the grown-ups comfort. And so there's this dance that gets established. And through neuroplasticity, the brain increasingly becomes more settled and more able to kind of go to that settled state on its own. Somewhere by the age of 25.
Please. Oh my goodness. I remember last night tending and me waking up, and I was just like, okay, so I'm up for another 23 years of this?
I promise you, usually by about age 3 or 4, they really have figured it out. And it's easy for me to say because I'm so far on the other side of it. But I look back now at those, precious moments in the quiet and stillness of the night where I got to be with my children and just have that really connected time with them. And I look back on that with such fondness.
If you saw me, I got a little bit emotional earlier. It's because when my first was born, I remember waking up in the night and there was this debate in me with my instinct and obviously my urgent need to answer to the cry and all the noise I had in my head that I'm making a rod on my back, I am not giving her the opportunity to learn how to sleep, and I am gonna cognitively impair my child because they won't know how to sleep by themselves. And I remember waking up my husband and telling him we are messing up our kids because they're supposed to learn how to self-soothe by now. And then obviously I got into the right research and right information. But I remember the struggle, and I remember the crying, my crying, because I wanted to answer that. And at one point, of course, luckily we didn't get to proceed with any kind of sleep training methods, although everyone was feeding me that information. Everyone was sending me. There are a growing number of sleep trainers in Romania growing. So I think we're a little bit like 10, 20 years behind the US and some other parts of the world. So I'm just here trying to send out that message, that it's okay. And when we wake up in the night, right now, I think of how many other mothers are awake and tending to their babies, and I try to send the good energy and just the feeling that we are all okay and we're gonna be okay. It's just a phase, and it's gonna get better. Another tricky subject in our society is divorce. So for parents who are co-parenting, and that we see more and more people who are in this situation, what are some strategies that can help maintain a healthy emotional, environment for a child who experiences the divorce of two parents, or the lack of having that unity in that home?
Yeah. So I am divorced, which makes it interesting for me to talk about that subject, because I have a professional experience of that, having navigated that alongside many, many families over the years, and now also a personal experience of that. And, one of the things when I was going through separation and divorce myself was I would look around at these, upheld, like brilliant examples of these, famous couples that are so successfully co-parenting, and they go to dinner together and on vacation together. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm never going to get there. That's never going to be how my divorce experience plays out. And what will that look like for my children? And even to now, it's been several years. Even to now, I don't really speak with my children's father. We don't, rarely see each other. Sometimes when the kids are sort of coming and going, or they have an event, we might cross paths, but that's not something that happens because the nature of that relationship is still very difficult, particularly for my first husband. And what I realized, and I think this is the message for all families, is that relationship requires one person for it to be successful. And so I like to say I have a really beautiful relationship with the father of my children, who, like, they are half him. And so it's really important that that relationship is upheld as sacred and as important, and that it's nurtured in the ways that are available to that. And what we can do, first of all, is to recognize relationship as a product of the mind. And so how are you connecting through the heart with that other person? Or on the other side, are you letting your ego get involved, and are you throwing gasoline on those flames and making it all be way more difficult than it needs to be? The second thing that we can do is give our children the other parent in our homes. And what I mean by that is that even if that other person is not inside that home with you on a regular basis, they can be inside that home here and here. And so when my children came to live with me full time, initially they shared their time, but they came to live with me full time, I made sure that that day there was a photograph of them when they were little new babies being cradled by their father, and it was placed on their bedside table so they would know that he has a place of honor in our home, and that I am the one that creates the open door for that relationship to play out.
Getting goosebumps right now.
And sometimes, for some families, that divorce will happen. It was simply that the relationship didn't play out, and the children get to have, both parents in equal measure. In my case, that wasn't how it played out. And so my job then became, how do I ensure that my children, not only have I given them their father in my home, but how have I given them their father in their hearts? And there's something about being able to, if there's a challenging behavior or a challenging experience that they have with their dad, being able to see through the facade of that into the truth of who he is, so that they can hold that in their hearts to know the truth of who he is. That how we behave isn't always the best measure of who we are. That each and every one of us is a soul, and we are here to remember that. And as part of that, if I want my boys to onboard that message about themselves, it is my job to ensure that they have onboarded that message about both their father and myself. And so you can, even if you don't get the Hollywood, divorce where you're going on vacations together, you can make sure that that relationship sings in a way that's really beautiful for your children.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I think that's going to be so valuable to so many, mothers and fathers who are writing to me. They're like, I'm going through a divorce. My child is 2, 3, 10, and I don't know how to handle it. And I speak of from the books and the information, but that just is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Sibling rivalry is something all parents dread, right? And I know when I had my second, my biggest fear was the relationship and how that is going to play out. How normal is it for the oldest or for the other ones to act out? What is the dynamics? How does a healthy dynamic look like? Because society says, oh, they're gonna love each other. They're brothers and sisters. They're from the same blood. Like they're supposed to just, they're gonna have a play partner now. They're gonna be so happy about it, won't they? How does that truly look like?
Dr. Laura Markham, who's a New York-based psychotherapist, she wrote a book called Peaceful Parent, Happy Siblings. And the thesis of the book is essentially that sibling rivalry actually has nothing to do with the relationship between the two children and everything to do with the relationship between each of those children and the parent. And so if you can think about it as an issue of supply and demand, where the child's access to you, the parent, they're like the life-giving force of that access, now becomes questioned. Like, is there enough of mommy to go around? Is there enough of daddy to go around? And so the idea is, how do you navigate it so that you are reducing the issue of supply and demand, and then the children don't need to be in competition with each other about securing that resource. I think there's a few things for us to think about. One is this idea that parents don't, when you have a second child or a third or fourth child, you don't just divide your love in half. I always told my boys that for each one of them, when they were born, I grew a new heart, and they each have a heart that's part of me, and so they get all of the love of that heart because that's how it works when you're a parent.
Yes, it's true.
The other thing that I think is really important is that when there does become conflict between the siblings, that we don't become the ones that are deciding who was right and who was wrong and all of those kinds of things, that we simply step in and lead the way through whatever it is to some kind of a more peaceful outcome. It doesn't matter who started it, who ended it, what exactly happened. What mattered is that a big person, you, stepped in and allowed for the moment to pass in a way that was emotionally safe for everybody involved. So as a parent, if you can think about, even how you might nurture the relationship that you have with your husband or with your best friend or with your own mother now that you're an adult or whatever the case is, how we do that is we put time into it. We put energy into it. We put thought into it. And if you can live that way with your children as much as you would for any other person that you loved, you'll find your way.
Good.
You'll find your way.
Beautiful. How important is it? I have 2 kids right now, so I always say that my kids never had the same parents, because while my first one, I learned how to become a mother of a newborn infant toddler with her, I am now a mother to my second one. But I also find that besides the different parents that they have, they're quite different in terms of temperament by themselves. As they, how important is it for us parents to understand those types of temperaments and try to parent the child we have in front of us, rather than trying to parent, out of strategies or out of knowledge, book knowledge?
I would say it's everything.
Okay.
Absolutely everything. There's this really beautiful book. I think it came out around 2018 by an epidemiologist by the name of Thomas Boyce. And when I was a doctoral student back in the late 90s, early 2000s, he was on sabbatical at my university. And so I got to go on my lunch hours and listen to him present lectures on different things. And he was talking a lot about the concept of the orchid child and the dandelion child.
Yeah.
And the dandelion child is actually my firstborn son. You can plant them in a crack in the cement in the sidewalk and forget to water them, and they're going to be fine.
Thrive.
They're not even just fine. They will be robust. They will love life. They will roll with whatever challenges come their way and find a way through. The orchid child is much like the plant, the orchid. And if you've ever tried to grow one, you'll know it's hard.
Oh my God. I think I'm on my 10th, 11th orchid.
Oh, yeah.
They're all fake.
Yeah, I've just given up the actual plant. But my second born son is an orchid. And so I had to really wrap my head around the idea of stepping into the space of relationship as a parent instead of trying to parent from techniques and tricks and strategies. In fact, that's one of the tensions that I wrestle with constantly in myself as an educator in the parenting industry, is that I don't want to give you a strategy. I don't want to tell you the technique to get through, because if I do that, I risk divorcing you from your own intuition and your own inner wisdom about who your child is. And so when you step into the space of relationship to parent instead of parenting from techniques, what you'll find is that you're actually being emotionally responsive to the needs of that child. Not, being rigidly held in this difficult space of having to do it this way, which, maybe works for that child, but is going to be devastating for this child. So I think it's incredibly important that we are attuned to the beingness of that child, and that we have coming out of us a wisdom and an emotional responsivity that connects exactly to that.
Thank you. Yeah. Speaking of, different temperaments and different children, how would a society that welcomes especially highly sensitive children with whom we know they have a harder time, tackling situations, fitting in or going for, playing with other kids, or they're just simply more often melting down. How does a society that welcomes a parent who is supporting the kid in the supermarket while on the phone look like? Because all I get are glares, right? And stuff like, oh, you don't know how to handle a child. If he was mine, he would never do that.
A little discipline would go a long way.
Yes, exactly. Like, what are you going to do with him when he's older? How would a society that welcomes, co-regulation, emotional health look like?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that we as parents can be in the lead of that. And we do that by always remembering we are here in the service of our child.
Okay.
We're not here in the service of the person who's being Judgy McJudgerson behind us in the lineup. That they don't need us.
Yeah.
We're not here in the service of them. We're not here in the service of our mother-in-law. We're not here in the service of, a well-intentioned teacher who thinks we're doing it all wrong. They're all grown-ups, so they can all figure their own situations out. We're here in the service of that child. And we know, first 6 years of life last forever. And even into adolescence, the brain is growing and restructuring and figuring out how to lay down neural track that is going to stay with the child through their life course, that will allow them to be buffered against emotional challenges when they're grown-ups, that will allow them to enter into relationships that are intimate and meaningful when they're grown-ups. And so when we can stay clear on the mission of being in the service of our children, and we just press the glare and the judgment of the world out, then you can be more alive and more awakened to the needs of who that child is. And I'll tell you what, sensitive children, there's something, oh look, that gave me goosebumps to say it, because I'm thinking about my son right now as I describe that. Sensitive children, they're often very bright. They are big thinkers and big feelers. And if you can just, I always think about, if their brain is functioning at this level of sensitivity, everything is a lot, and their co-regulatory or their regulatory system is here, then they're going to need a little bit longer than other children for that brain to get tall enough that they're like, okay, I got it. And so in my clinical practice, what I normally see is that children who are highly sensitive, it's going to be a little bit of an interesting ride until they're about 10 to 12 years of age. And it seems that if you've really parented through relationship, and you can't, protect them from everything, but if you've worked to really buffer them, you've worked to turn the volume down on their lives, to step in fiercely at times, to protect where that's required, they will start to come through that. And what happens is the gifts that are on board, the gifts that come as part of being sensitive, really begin to come forward. So my son, when he was born, he wasn't super happy about it.
Yeah, I know.
Like, he arrived and he came into the world crying and screaming even, and didn't stop until he was roughly like 5 years old. It was just a really intense time.
I know. In the midst of that.
And I remember the first 8 weeks of his life, I felt like the crying never stopped. And so I did, what I thought was the right thing. I was carrying him around, had him on my body, was bouncing him and all of the skin to skin, all of the things. And I was singing to him. And I realized when he was 8 weeks old that it was the sound of my singing voice that was making him cry more. Because you could probably tell by my speaking voice, I don't have the singing voice of an angel. And he's now 17 years old and a gifted musician who has perfect pitch.
Oh, wow.
So that's part of his sensitivity. It allowed him to be alive that way. And now, as a musician, he's extraordinary. Just an incredible talent. He's so alive for his art, and he lives for that. And what would it have been like if I had, drummed that out of him because he was too loud and it was too much and that was enough, I think it would have shut him down.
I'm just envisioning what my highly sensitive baby girl will turn out. It will maybe an opera singer for sure.
Or some kind of a big thinker, or even if, how it manifests is that those feelings stay alive. Because if you can have all of that sensitive feeling part of you alive and be right and solid and regulated and settled within self, imagine, what kind of psychologist you could be. Imagine what kind of parent you could be. Imagine what kind of partner you could be.
Human altogether,
What a gift to the world to let that shine through.
Wow. Yeah, that's a vision to work to. If there's one message you would like to send out to the parents out there, new parents or parents of adolescents who I find they have just as a hard time just of parents of toddlers who are now, getting in the midst of, and what would you say to those parents? Just anything that comes to your mind.
My answer will probably be ironic, given that I, write books and speak to parents all the time. But my answer is simply that you don't need to crowdsource how to parent.
Okay.
Your path that you will land on, the way through, is something that you already know. You just need to make the world around you be quiet enough that you can hear the voice from inside of you.
Your own voice.
And whatever that voice is, that uninfluenced voice, the voice that comes from the depth of who you are, from the truth of who you are, that voice will never steer you wrong. And so listen to that voice. Don't listen to the voices of the world. Listen to the voice of your own heart, and you'll be right. Even if you don't know the answer, you will be the answer. And it will all play out as it is intended to do.
Thank you. I always tell mothers, and listen to your instincts more than to the podcast or to whatever else, because at the end of the day, that's who you're gonna sit with, with yourself, with your child, with the relationship between you two. And regardless of what you're trying to put into practice, sometimes just even the most well-intentioned advice may not sit right with you or with your kids. So you need to take that, listen, yes, but be who you are with your child. But I find that, including myself, I find it so hard sometimes because of all the noise and all the media and all the online, and now today's world with social media and everything is just so hard. So I'm really excited for tomorrow.
Same.
When we're going to be able to say this firsthand to parents, to educators, to, mothers and future mothers. And thank you for this opportunity, for being with us.
Honor. Thank you.
Good.